Dear Mum and Dad, I'm writing this from Mombasa, where we arrived the day before yesterday. Being Sunday afternoon, the small boats are all out, and we are sitting near the entrance of the harbour, where we can see the racing. Some of our chaps are out sailing, but I thought this would be a good chance to write and tell you how I've been getting on. Well, a lot has happened since that day you saw me off to join the ship. Remember how wet it was? The company sent me and 2 other new blokes with all our gear in a big shooting brake down to the Royal Albert Docks, where our ship was alongside. She's a single-screw cargo liner, built 1952, 7,551 tons displacement, with a 6-cylinder Doxford diesel engine of 6,800 horsepower, giving a service speed of 14.5 knots. As soon as we got on board, we changed into working kit and turned out with the others for boat drill, which I must say seemed rather a queer do while we were still sitting tied up alongside the quay, loading cargo. You should have seen us on the same job a fortnight later in the Red Sea, with a blazing hot sun overhead, doing the full treatment. That means swinging out boats on their davits ready for lowering, checking all gear, rations and water in each boat, rigging masts and hoisting sails. In fact, about the only thing we don't do as part of the practice is to sink the ship. Well, I expect you'll want to hear about the work on board. Every morning we start bright and early with 15 minutes PT under our CPO. That's Chief Petty Officer, the senior cadet on board. Anyone keen on boxing gets a chance to put the gloves on occasionally. Some of the cadets are pretty hot, but I find I can usually hold my own with anyone my weight, thanks to Dad's efforts in the back garden last summer. Next, we are mustered on deck in working kit, and the day's work allotted. Our cadet instruction officer, the CIO, who takes us both for practical training and lectures, is not a bad chap, but a tough nut when it comes to work. He seems to know by instinct how much is the most you can possibly do, and it's just that amount that he expects you to get done. We generally spend part of the day on cleaning and maintenance. There are plenty of bits and pieces on board which need attention, and our chief officer is as fussy about our decks and rigging as Mum is about her Welsh dresser. As Dad always says, there's a right way and a wrong way of doing every job. Only in a ship, it's as well to learn the right way first time off, before you get hurt. To see 3 or 4 of our chaps splicing one of the big wire ropes they use in the rigging, you'd think they were wrestling with a couple of rebellious pythons. The other day we had to send the topping lifts down for greasing. Nothing complicated about it, but you just don't want to take any chances with a chunk of metal weighing a couple of 100 pounds. And you can get some quite good exercise standing on top of a 30-foot Samson post, trying to shake loose a 3/4-inch bolt that's got a bit rusty. By the way, Mum will be relieved to know we have a fully qualified doctor on board to patch us up if anybody does come to grief. Though I think his only patient so far has been a bloke who ate some overripe dates at Port Side. Incidentally, the food on board is okay. In fact, you can tell Uncle Jeremy from me that those wisecracks of his about salt pork and ship's biscuits are definitely out of date so far as our menus on board Chantala are concerned. Also, our dormitories are amidships, not before the mast. They have jolly comfortable bunks and are big enough for the occasional pillow fight. Each dormitory has one of the biggest chests of drawers you ever saw in it, with lockable lockers for us to keep all our gear in. The officers' cabins are just the job, fitted out with everything that opens and shuts. Something to look forward to in about 4 years' time. The schoolwork we have to do is aimed at getting us through our second mate's certificate exams at the end of 4 years, or 3.5 if we do a full 3 years in a cadetship. Maths is pretty important, so it's a good thing that was about my best subject at school. I don't think I shall have much trouble with it, though some of the spherical trig problems we come up against in our 3rd and 4th year look a bit tricky. The same goes for general science, which begins with stuff I know a bit about already, and goes on to specialize physics and mechanics as applied to ships, and also a certain amount about wireless and radar. Another subject new to most of us is ship construction, which means learning the name of every conceivable part of a ship, what it is for, and how it works. The other two main subjects, seamanship and navigation, are only partly bookwork in the schoolroom, and include some really interesting stuff, like the different rigs for small boats, which we were doing last week. Navigation is a bit forbidding at first sight, but no doubt it's pretty important, being what we depend on to save us from losing our way as soon as we get out of sight of land. Some of the early work came into jog lessons at school, but later on it takes in all the calculations needed to find your exact position anywhere in the world and work out the correct course to wherever you want to go. One good point about training in a ship is that after having something explained in the schoolroom, say for instance the sextant, which is the gadget used for measuring the angle of the sun, moon or stars above the horizon, from which, if you happen to know the exact time, you can calculate your longitude, don't ask me how till next year, you can straight away apply what you've learnt out on deck. Taking a sight at noon to compare with the one taken by the officer of the watch. When we get on to doing problems of navigation, we use real Admiralty charts, like the ones they use on the bridge for navigating the ship. A good deal of the training in seamanship consists of learning to do ourselves all the jobs which men will be doing under us when we are officers. Besides what we learn from actually working the ship, we get ropes and knots on deck twice a week with the chief officer. He also takes charge of Semaphore Practice, which we still have to do, although its place has been taken to some extent by wireless and loud hailers. With this practice, we team up in pairs, taking it in turn to read the signals and write them down. We all have a regular spell at the wheel up on the bridge. It's really quite a thrill when you feel the whole ship, all 7,551 tons of her, answering to your hand at the helm. Of course, the wheel doesn't work the rudder direct on big ships like these. It controls the valves in a massive great hydraulic affair, which turns the rudder by means of a solid steel shaft, nearly a foot thick. Although some chaps have other hobbies, a lot of us spend a good deal of our spare time doing odd jobs on our whaler, which the cadets are allowed to use for sailing, when we are in port. This small boat business certainly gets a hold on you if you let it. Several of the officers seem to spend their spare time the same way. On Saturday nights at sea, we generally get together for a bit of a sing-song.
Out to the purser will always say, never a query, never a frown. And he'll knock them down. If you're in the rail, the line is the ground. So get out to the purser.
There's not too much bull on board on the whole, but on Sunday mornings we turn out in our number ones for divisions, a kind of general inspection by the captain. When it's hot, you leave it to the last possible moment to put on your white tunic, otherwise it's liable to wilt before the inspection. After this, there is divine service, taken by the captain. One thing I don't think will ever quite wear off, and that's the excitement of entering a foreign port for the first time. You come slowly in, watching and being watched by other ships which are already tied up or lying at anchor. On the forecastle head, the chief officer is standing by with the hands ready to moor her, with Chips, our Chinese carpenter, waiting to let go the anchor. One of the cadets will be taking soundings and singing out every minute or two how much water we have under us. You can hear the old man on the bridge giving his orders to the helm and engine room. Then, very gently, you reach the spot, and there may be a slightly hectic moment when the anchor chain has to be shaken free. Then away it goes with a roar, and we have to start getting ready to pay out the big mooring rope that's used to tie her up to the buoy. Finally, the house flag goes up at the bows to show that we are moored and no longer underway. We got to Mombasa very early on Friday morning. The entrance to the harbour is a narrow channel to the south of the island on which the town is built. We anchored in the stream, and it didn't take us long to get the boat boom rigged and some boats ready for action. The people here are being very good to us, and most of us have already had some time ashore. Yesterday, we sent off a cricket team to play the locals at the Mombasa Sports Club. And another lot went off later in the afternoon for some hockey, which turned out to be against a side of girls, most dangerous. Our rugby and soccer teams are both going to get a chance next week. We can also go ashore just to wander around exploring the town and island and seeing what we can find in the markets. Most of the trade round here seems to be in the hands of Indians, but we found some Africans doing quite a brisk business in the middle of the main street, selling wooden curios they had carved themselves. Well, I must pack this up as it's time to go. Don't worry, Mum. This is a good life and I'll be okay. Your loving son, Jim.
Jim could be right. He probably will be okay. The training he will get on board his cadetship should enable him to obtain the Ministry of Transport's second mate certificate within 3.5 years. And after that, a job will be waiting for him in one of the British India fleet of more than 60 passenger and cargo ships. These ships are of many types. The smallest is the little Mombasa, 2,200 tons, trading up and down the East African coast. Then come the various classes of merchantmen serving on regular routes all over the Eastern Hemisphere. D-class ships of about 5,000 tons, carrying passengers and freight up the Persian Gulf, the O-class of about 6,000 tons, and the P and I classes, which are rather larger, all employed in maintaining a frequent and flexible cargo service along the main routes between Europe, the Persian Gulf, India, Australia, and the Far East. The numerous and up-to-date C-class, 7,000 to 7,500 tons, and the larger and faster N-class, which link Europe, Australia, East Africa, the Persian Gulf and the Bay of Bengal. Then there are Santhia and Sangola, 9,000 tons, plying between Calcutta, Rangoon, the Straits and the Far East, and Kampala and Karanja, 11,000 tons, linking Bombay and Karachi with East and South African ports. There are 3 troop ships, including the magnificent new 20,000-ton Nevassa, which was commissioned during the company's centenary year, and finally there are Kenya and Uganda, modern 15,000-ton passenger and cargo liners on the London East Africa service. In addition to the deck officers who control and navigate them, these ships need about the same number of engineer officers, on whom rests an equal share of the responsibility for the ship's safe and punctual arrival at the end of every voyage. For engineers, the company runs a separate cadet training scheme, designed to enable boys to become engineer officers in BI ships within 4.5 years of their engagement. 2 years of this time are spent at a technical school, taking the ordinary national diploma course in mechanical engineering, specially adapted for marine engineers. The next 18 months are spent at sea, serving as an engineer cadet in a BI ship, and the remaining year undergoing a special course of training at a marine engineering works ashore. Boys enrolled as cadets under these 2 schemes have the prospect of becoming in due course captains or chief engineer officers in ships of the BI fleet. Their jobs will take them to a variety of interesting and remote places. To India, with its long and colorful history, a country whose great cities and vast resources, patiently developed through many years of British rule, are enabling it to become an industrial giant in eastern commerce. To the Persian Gulf, center of an Arab world made suddenly rich by the rapid exploitation of the oil underlying its deserts. To Ceylon, the beautiful island which seems to have everything: fertile plains, forest-clad mountains, venerable temples and shrines, broad rivers, even tame elephants to help out with the heavy jobs in the plantations. To Burma, that lovable, lazy land of paddy fields and pagodas. To Singapore, meeting place of East and West, which British rule and the Chinese flair for business have made into one of the great trading centers of the world. Still further east, to Japan, where a growing mastery of modern ideas and methods blends oddly with a deep respect for ancient tradition. To Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, the Philippines, there are BI ships to be found almost everywhere on the ocean highways and byways of the East. Details of these schemes are printed in 2 booklets, Deck Cadets and Engineer Cadets. Either of these the company will be glad to send to anyone interested in a career at sea.